welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really tangled situation in Venezuela. You've got a Nobel Peace Prize that, believe it or not, is actually fanning the flames of a potential war. So we're going to unpack how the country got to this incredibly dangerous point and what might be coming next. So picture this. It's October 2025. A new administration in the White House has completely changed the game for Venezuela. Forget economic pressure. We're talking about direct military force now being on the table. And that, well, that's pushing the entire region right to the edge. And things moved, breathtakingly fast. Look at this timeline. On October 2nd, the U.S. rolls out this new legal term, a non-international armed conflict, basically a justification to act. Just 5 days later, boom, all diplomacy with the Maduro government is cut off. 3 days after that, the Pentagon is openly talking about land strikes. And by the 22nd, we're seeing U.S. strikes hitting targets all the way in the Pacific. This is just an incredible acceleration of conflict. And, this wasn't just talk. This new strategy had a real immediate human cost. We're talking at least 37 deaths in just the first month. The UN came out with a really scathing response, calling these strikes extrajudicial executions and a violation of international law. So all of a sudden, this isn't just a physical conflict anymore. It's become a huge legal and moral battle, playing out for the whole world to see. Okay, so you've got this military standoff, right? Tensions are already through the roof. And then, just when you think things can't get any more complicated, the Nobel Committee in Oslo drops an absolute bombshell, one that's about to pour gasoline on this whole fire. And that bombshell, the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize. It goes to the opposition leader, María Corina Machado. The committee praised her as this champion of nonviolence, someone who could unify the country. They even brought back her old slogan from 20 years ago, ballots over bullets. The message they were trying to send was crystal clear. Hey, there's a peaceful way out of this. But, the ink on that award wasn't even dry before a massive backlash just erupted. Her critics started painting a totally different picture. They pointed to her history of calling for foreign military intervention, her strong support for those really tough U.S. sanctions, her ties to Israel's right-wing Likud party, and maybe the biggest bombshell of all, she'd actually endorsed the very U.S. strikes that the UN had just called extrajudicial killings. So this Peace Prize almost immediately got nicknamed the War Prize. Talk about a paradox. And just like that, the award basically split the world right down the middle. On one side, you had the EU and the UN celebrating it, calling it a huge win for democracy. But on the other side, Venezuela's allies, think Cuba and Bolivia, were absolutely furious. They called it an immoral political move. So instead of bringing people together, the Nobel Prize just drew another battle line in the sand. So you gotta ask, how on earth did we get here? How does a relationship that was built on oil for 100 years turned into this open hostility, this threat of actual war? It's a long story for sure, but there are some really key moments we need to understand. For the longest time, the whole U.S.-Venezuela relationship could be summed up in one word: oil. U.S. companies practically built their oil industry. Venezuela was like a dependable gas station for America. But that all fell apart in 1999 with the rise of Hugo Chavez. He directly challenged U.S. influence, and then his successor, Nicolás Maduro, oversaw a total economic collapse, which prompted the U.S. to launch its maximum pressure campaign. The final nail in the coffin was that huge oil embargo in 2019. And when you look at how this maximum pressure campaign was built, it's actually pretty systematic and kind of chilling. It wasn't just one thing. It started back in 2014 with targeted sanctions on specific officials. Then, in 2017, they tightened the financial screws, locking Venezuela out of U.S. financial markets. The big one, the real knockout punch, was the oil embargo in 2019. And then, as we saw in 2025, that pressure escalated to lethal force. It was like a deliberate turn of the screw, each step getting tighter and tighter. Which brings us to the biggest question in all of this, right? After everything we've just talked about, how is Maduro's government still in power? The answer, funnily enough, isn't in Venezuela. It's thousands of miles away. Maduro has some very powerful friends. Two global giants, Russia and China, are basically propping up his regime. And they each play a different but vital role. Think of it like this. Russia is the military muscle. They're supplying weapons, doing joint exercises, and, this is huge, they provide a diplomatic shield with their veto power at the UN Security Council. Meanwhile, China is the bank. They're the economic powerhouse, pumping in more than $60 billion with these loans for oil deals that basically keep the lights on. But, keeping the lights on is one thing. When you actually try to figure out what's happening with Venezuela's economy, good luck. You're not going to find clear data. What you'll find is a war, a data war, where numbers are basically used as weapons, and the truth, well, the truth is the first thing to go. I mean, just look at these numbers for the first part of 2025. It's like they're describing two different planets. The government claims the economy is booming, growing over 9%, but independent sources like the IMF, they say it's actually shrinking by almost 3%. The government talks about pumping more oil, but nobody can verify that. And inflation? The government doesn't even give a forecast, while the IMF is predicting a mind-blowing 270%. This isn't just a minor disagreement. It's two completely separate realities. So while they fight over numbers, here's what's not up for debate: the catastrophic human cost of all this. The reality on the ground is just devastating. You got almost 8 million people inside Venezuela who desperately need aid. You have another 8 million who have already fled the country. That's one of the biggest refugee crises on the planet. And for the people still there, more than 40% are struggling with food insecurity. They literally don't know where their next meal is coming from. That's the real staggering price of this collapse. Okay, so let's just recap for a second. We've got direct military pressure from the US, a super controversial Nobel Prize, powerful allies like Russia and China keeping the government afloat, and an absolutely devastating humanitarian crisis. All of these forces are crashing into each other at the same time. So, what happens next? Let's walk through 3 possible scenarios for the future. All right, scenario A. This is the most extreme one. The US launches a swift military operation to take out Maduro and his top circle. It's the fastest option on paper, but the risk is huge. Analysts warn it could easily turn into a disaster, getting US troops stuck in a brutal, messy urban war. Basically a Mogadishu-style quagmire right in Caracas. Okay, scenario B is a bit more likely, and this seems to be what US strategy is really aiming for: an internal fracture. The hope is that if the US keeps up the pressure, eventually some key military leaders will decide to turn on Maduro, to save their own skins in a kind of palace coup. But that's a massive gamble. You're betting you can crack a security system that has been incredibly good and incredibly brutal at stamping out any kind of internal threat. And that brings us to scenario C. This is seen as the most probable outcome, and honestly, it might be the most terrifying. It's just a protracted stalemate, a permanent crisis. In this future, nothing really breaks. The US keeps the military pressure on but doesn't invade. Maduro holds on to power thanks to his allies. And the Venezuelan people? They're just trapped in the middle of it all as the crisis gets worse and worse. The whole region is just holding its breath because one mistake, one miscalculation could tip the whole thing into a massive war. So you're left with this massive question. In this perfect storm of military threats, diplomatic awards, and a high-stakes game of geopolitical chess, which one of these forces is going to be the thing that finally breaks this deadlock? Will it be military power, diplomatic pressure, or just cold, hard geopolitical reality? Right now, nobody knows, and the fate of an entire nation is just hanging in the balance.